people who are mentally healthy would not ever go and kill children. We went away from referring to it as an active shooter years ago. We started referring to it, at least in our area, as active threat. Warning signs that are communicated to law enforcement have to take an active role. And I will tell you, they don't always do a great job. They just don't. Everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cheer Biz podcast. I'm your host, Dan Cotton, and today we are going to be talking about a serious subject. We are talking about active shooters and are you prepared? Now, if you are a kiddo listening or you have kiddos in the car, I would maybe recommend doing this in a setting where you have an earbud. This is more of a for adults episode. I am going to be talking about some very serious subjects in this. I'm not going to get graphic or anything like that. This is not a murder podcast, but we are going to be talking about a serious subject. So just know that you may want to have little ears away from this. I actually just recently had an athlete tell me that they were listening to the podcast, and this athlete's like 6 years old. I just would recommend you listen to this somewhere else. So if you're listening to this in sequence, there recently was a tragic school shooting in Georgia at a high school this last week. It just inspired me to talk about this on the podcast. I'm not going to be giving you any sort of political viewpoints or anything like that, but I do have a lot of experience in this subject. So for those of you who are new to the podcast or don't know me that well, I've served for 15 years as a full-time police officer. I'm still a reserve police officer. And 6 of those years, some of my favorite years working in law enforcement were working directly in the schools as a school resource officer. I spent a lot of time focused on preventing things like this from happening in our school district. And our school district had 45,000 kids, 5 high schools, 16 middle schools. So a pretty big district. And we were a team of 6 school resource officers. Unfortunately, we did deal with this quite a bit in terms of prevention. We never had an actual school shooting occur within our district, which was fantastic. We did have a swatting incident that was pretty scary, that we thought there was a school shooting going on and responded as if there was, but at an elementary school, but there was not. But I have a lot of experience with this and actually dedicated the last 2 years of my time in the schools to really focusing on developing a more advanced and robust training system for teachers to be prepared in these events because I believe in training. Obviously, I'm a teacher kind of at heart. And so pulling upon my experience to go into the schools and do an advanced training, and also was fortunate enough to launch a pilot program in the district that took off, but didn't take off because I ended up leaving the team because I had to, due to our department's requirements of you can only do 6 years in a given assignment. But I ended up leaving the team, but we had the opportunity to do what we called an advanced active threat training with the student body, where we spent a full day at a middle school actually training the kids in best practices, answering questions. And it was something that everyone started thinking was really, really scary and ended with kids feeling empowered and like they knew better what to do. It was very well received overall and was a really fantastic experience. So I've spent a lot of time working on this. I've traveled around the country. I've presented on it in a couple different areas. I've been to a number of conferences. So I have a bit of experience, and I just want to give you my outside perspective on the cheer industry and are you prepared? So getting into the details of it. Number one, we're going to talk about preparing for an incident. So that's going to be the first thing. If we're preparing for there to be some sort of active incident at our gym. Now, we went away from referring to it as an active shooter years ago. We started referring to it, at least in our area, as active threat, because the implication of active shooter is they have a firearm, and someone, as we've seen across the globe, someone with a knife can still be very, very dangerous. And we recently saw the incident that happened in the UK where it was actually a Taylor Swift dance camp thing that many of us host similar in our gym. And I don't think that was why it was targeted, but it was a youth Taylor Swift dance camp where someone came in and with a knife and killed some children. So these are obviously horrendous things that are almost unimaginable, unfathomable for people who do what we do in our industry. You can't even wrap your brain around why someone would do this. And realistically, even being a professional who's done this and investigated this and looked into motivations, the why is semi irrelevant because it's not mentally sound. It's not logical. It's just horrible. And it's hard to imagine it ever happening. So first off, I think the first thing to say as we look at preparation is this likely to happen in your gym? Should you be up at night worried about this happening in your gym? Because if you turn on the news, it seems like it. And the reality is no, you should not. These are very rare events, incredibly rare, infrequent, they're rare, and they're often interceded with before they end up happening. But just because something rarely happens doesn't mean we shouldn't be prepared for it to happen, because there are things that can happen that are incredibly rare. But if that really rare thing is happening to you, it's pretty real. And it doesn't matter how unlikely it was, it's happening right now. And we want to be prepared. So is it likely in a cheer gym? No, I don't think so. I will kind of talk through what we might see and what I think are the more likely scenarios versus the less likely. So first off, do I think that it is a very likely scenario to see a athlete come to a cheer gym, like a student-led violent thing like we had in Georgia, where it was a student at the school, a 14-year-old who ended up going into a classroom with a firearm and shooting students and then trying to get to another one? No, I don't, because of just the environment. It's a different circumstance than a high school, right? High school it's easy to fall through the cracks. Oftentimes these kids feel ostracized. They feel like loners. It's a more rare situation, on top of a lot of the incidents that occur in schools revolve around gang violence as well. So those things do happen as well. So I don't know that it's super likely. In fact, I think it's incredibly unlikely that an athlete would bring a weapon to the gym and try and harm other athletes because of the communities that we build. It's a very unlikely scenario. It's possible, but incredibly, like I would say almost non-existent possibility. And I am not kept up at night thinking that an athlete might bring a firearm to the gym and try and harm their teammates. I just don't see that. And I personally believe, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, I think that you would have some pretty significant warning signs ahead of time to maybe be keeping an eye on that kid and making some adjustments. So what might we see? Well, I think it's possible that you could see things that relate to domestic violence spilling into the gym. And this is where I think there is some risk, where you have contentious divorces or unstable parents who maybe are having some sort of a mental break, and they do have access to firearms and they are a threat. This is something that we deal with a lot in the law enforcement world. This is why there are things like red flag laws in certain states where someone is deemed to be a danger to the public. And so we try to remove those firearms from them in the short term until we can get them treatment. I think that is possible. And we've had some kind of not scary moments in our gym, but some references of this where it's like, hey, dad was arrested for, physical abuse and he can't be around the kids. And so we have to have that parent's like photo at the front desk. Like, if you see this person, it's a call to 911. They're not allowed to be here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's probably the more likely scenario to see, is some sort of outside family situation that comes into the gym. And these are a little bit harder to predict, because unless you have good communication with the family, they're not necessarily coming in the gym and being like, hey guys, I'm having a really horrible life situation and the person I married is not doing well and has made threats of violence to us. Like, that's not something people necessarily want to talk about. So you may not know some of those things that are going on. So that's probably the most likely. Or the next most likely, or maybe more likely, would be some sort of a risk, threat, danger that comes from the outside community that has nothing to do with your gym, but just due to bad luck, due to things occurring, somehow impacts your gym. So this would be a scenario like someone robs a bank and they happen to ditch their car and be running from the police, and they go run into the gym to hide. They see an open door and they run in there to hide, or something like that. That might be a scenario you would see, and is something that we saw in law enforcement that I dealt with personally on a number of different occasions, where we would see bad actors who are placing the general public at risk through no fault of their own, through no even relationship in any way, shape, or form. They're complete strangers, and they are just, it is a opportunity to try and flee from the police or hide or take advantage of something. That, or you could just have the random person suffering from some sort of a mental health crisis or issue that causes them to be more likely to commit violence. And I do want to say, I am not trying to say anything about people who are struggling with mental health. That's not what I mean. I just have done this for a long time. And in our identifiers, generally speaking, when we're talking about people who engage in mass acts of violence, they are suffering from some sort of mental health struggle at the time that is causing them to not be mentally sound. Because, and I will just weigh in, this is not a political belief, this is just a personal belief. People who are mentally healthy would not ever go and kill children. That's just not a mentally healthy thing to do, to set out to just kill children or anyone like that. That's not being mentally sound. So I'm not trying to say anything about people who struggle with mental health. I know that the vast majority of people who have mental health challenges are not violent and not a danger. So that's not what I mean. So we might see some sort of outside impact. Knowing that those are the kind of likely scenarios that we might see, how would we prevent these things? What are some of the best practices that I would suggest? Number one, as we go back to talking about like an athlete in the gym, one is just being very aware. Look for changes in behavior in your athletes in general. That's just a good rule of thumb. But be aware of if they're withdrawn, be aware if they're acting odd. Any of these situations, when we're looking at people, we want to look at what their physical behaviors are, as well as their, like, what are the indicators? Generally, if something gives you like a hair on the back of your neck, that's curious. We naturally dismiss those things because we like to feel like we are safe, but those are good things to be like, that's a little bit weird. I'm going to go look at that. Total side note, but coaches always are like, how do you always see this? Because I'll go to camps, I'll go to gyms, and I'll be like, hey, I think you need to have a conversation with that kiddo. Have you noticed all the cuts on their arm? And they're like, what do you mean cuts? I haven't noticed anything. I'm like, they're self-harming at home, or they're self-harming in some way that, like, you can see there's straight line scratches, cuts on their arm. That's an indicator of some things that we need to intervene in. And we oftentimes are easily dismissive of stuff. I've just learned through my career to naturally ask questions about those things, and also know what they're indicators of a little bit, because I saw it so much working in the schools. I mean, this was my day in every single day for 6 years dealing with this kind of stuff. So we want to be looking for changes in behaviors. We want to be looking at physical indicators. If we're looking at someone who comes in that looks a little bit suspicious, we're not sure that they're a parent in the gym or something like that, we would be looking for suspicious bulges. We would be looking for things like what we call indexing, which is, think of what you do whenever you're wondering if you have your phone on you and you normally carry it in your wallet, right? You touch your part of your body where it is. Like, I feel it. Oh, I feel my phone's there. I do it all the time. I like touch my pocket. Oh yeah, my phone's there. In fact, I just did it right now talking to you and I could feel my phone. People do that all the time where they're like checking to see if something's there. Well, if you're carrying a gun, it's likely that you might touch it to confirm its presence. It's like a subconscious thing. So we want to look for things like weird bulges, weird bags that people shouldn't be bringing into the gym, indexing, those kind of things would all be things that we would want to keep an eye out for. Again, incredibly unlikely, everyone, incredibly unlikely. Other best practices. So that was just kind of related to an athlete in the gym. Other best practices for the kind of outside stuff. One, encourage your families to communicate and be open with you if they're having struggles at home. Just say, hey, for the general safety, if you're ever having concerns about the safety of your athletes or things in your family, please let us know so you can be in the know on that. Open lines of communication are fantastic. Number two, if at all possible, have multiple layers of what you would consider defense, right? I want someone who's a potential risk to my athletes to have to pass through multiple areas of alert where someone might see that something is wrong. Does that mean that your front desk people are potentially exposed? Yep, it does. How they help is they try to be aware, they try and know what's going on around them, but that's really hard because ultimately, do you want your front desk sitting there scanning outside to see if there's someone dangerous coming in? No, you don't. That's not what they're there for. They're there to sell, they're there to interact with clients. And again, very low frequent, like very, very, very unlikely. But we can be on top of it by being just a little bit more aware, just reminding ourselves every once in a while, hey, don't forget to watch out for potential risks and dangers. So have those multiple layers. You could certainly keep the door locked, or you could follow what a lot of schools do now, which is where they have kind of a vestibule entrance where you have one entrance door that's locked. And when people get there, you use a magnetic lock, allow them into the kind of vestibule area, verify who they are, and then let them into the school. So there is some sort of a barrier, or they can come in through the unlocked door to be in the vestibule. Then they have to pass through a locked door that needs to be opened. There's a number of like security elements you could put into place. I don't know that they're necessary for a cheer gym. I think they are potentially a little bit redundant. Maybe you have a school element. So like we're going to be launching a preschool here in the next year, hopefully. And that is something that we're looking at doing so we can implement it during like the school day. So we can have a little bit more security for our preschool kiddos. The last thing in terms of best practices is have a plan. Know what it is you would do, and it's okay to communicate that plan to your athletes. So for us, our plan in our gym is ultimately, and it should be generally speaking, everyone's plan. There is an approach. It's called run, hide, fight, or there's a standard response protocol, which involves a lockout, a lockdown, a shelter in place, evacuation. There's multiple categories for what's called the standard response protocol. Your kids should have practiced some of these things or been at least talked to about some of these things in their schools, I would hope. But you want to know a plan. Generally speaking, with a cheer gym, we might do what's called a lockout. And I think they've changed the terminology since I was in the schools. A lockout, which is where we just want to keep whatever is potentially outside. So this would be a situation where something's happening in the community. A parent comes in and is like, hey, there's a bunch of police cars right down the street. Maybe we just make it a practice if something like that happens to lock the front door and just lock the doors and make it so nothing bad could get in until we know things are safe. Number two with a lockout is to have a landline. So if there is something going on and dispatch is trying to call local businesses and let people know, you can also oftentimes register your business and say, hey, we're not a school, but we do service youth and we are open to the public. So if you could put us on your call list if something's happening in our area, and there are many dispatch centers that have call lists to know, okay, these people are open. They need a phone call to let them know what's going on. They cannot do that as well with cell phones yet. I think that's coming someday to be able to like do a push notification out to cell phones that there's an emergency in the area. But that's kind of the general, they need a landline to call in and let you know that something's happening. Have a plan for a lockout. And then I don't think a lockdown makes sense in a cheer gym. There's really not a lot of spaces to lock doors and hide and prevent someone from gaining access to cause athletes harm. So generally speaking, we're going to do some sort of a mass evacuation. We're going to treat it like the building is on fire and get out as fast as you can. The last thing would be to prepare for what's going to happen if someone does start causing violence. What is the staff response going to be? Who's going to be taking care of the athletes? It goes without saying that, and my staff know, if someone's trying to harm our kids, I'm going to be harming them, or I'm not going to be capable of harming anyone because I will have lost my life, but I'm never going to like just run away because it goes against my genetic coding. So I'm going to be out there trying to stop the bad person from doing bad things. That may not be any of your staff's skill set, and that's okay. I think it's good to know what your skill set is and lean into your skill set. So if your skill set is, I'm going to get these kids out of this building as fast as possible, that's the best thing to do. Ultimately, the best thing you can do in any act of any violent incident, no matter what it is create distance between yourself and the violence. That is the safest thing you can possibly do. So create distance. If you cannot create distance, then you want to try and barricade and hide. If you cannot barricade and hide and you cannot create distance, then you ultimately have to try and protect yourself. Those are my best practices. And if they all sound really crummy, you're right. Nothing I'm telling you is super awesome. But again, I want to echo for the 100th time, this is very, 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 very unlikely in your gym. Okay, so I just want you to be aware. Now, I recently had an Academy member who I work with directly reach out and say, hey, do you keep a gun in the gym? Because we had this incident happen and it was scary. Someone came in from outside the community and I was pretty scared. And we had a long conversation about that. I would just say, if you're planning to have a firearm in your facility, you need to have people be appropriately trained. Shooting is really, really hard, especially shooting under stress. And you need to figure out what your methodology is going to be having it be accessible so it actually could make a difference in some sort of an incident and not be accessible to athletes. And that is kind of a tough one to answer. All right. So I want to talk about preparing for an incident in the community. This is the next big thing, which is basically what people in Georgia are dealing with now. And I think I saw Star ATL posted that they were closed. I think it was relatively close to their gym, this incident. And you need to be prepared for what would happen if this happens in one of our schools or in our community. There's some sort of an event. How is that going to then impact the gym? I think that starting to align your resources of this will be our response, creating a plan of, hey, we're going to close for a day. And then the next day, we're going to try and bring in some counselors and bring in some people if kids need to talk. This is going to be our approach, and create that plan. I actually did a whole class on this a couple different times at conference called When Tragedy Strikes, to be prepared for when things like this happen in your community. And the more you're prepared for it, the more you can follow that plan, the easier it's going to be when you're under stress. But you can be prepared for this. It doesn't take a lot of stress. It doesn't take a lot of anxiety. And you can create a plan, a draft plan. If you need help kind of coming up with some things to do, shoot me an email, dan@nextgenowners.com. I'll happily share with you my checklist of what I would want to be doing and reaching out for. Know that if an incident happens in the school district, if you reach out to the school district for counselors to be on site at your gym, they're probably going to tell you no, because their counselors are already going to be tasked to be in the schools. The last thing I want to kind of talk to you guys on is just to remember that you can play a key role in prevention of these incidents. The best thing that you can do is communicate concerns and encourage athletes to communicate concerns to the right people. Dismissing those concerns creates a higher likelihood that things happen. It is only through reporting of people on the ground, followed up by good law enforcement officers doing their job and actually intervening, and then additional RAP services circling around these kiddos who are struggling in that moment and feeling the need to cause violence, and getting them treatment and reintegration into the community. It's only through those three things that we prevent these kind of incidents. There's really no other answer to it. We need communication from the people who are there. Generally, there are warning signs. Not always easy, but there are generally some warning signs. That's been reported in almost every one of these incidents. Warning signs that are communicated to law enforcement. Law enforcement have to take an active role. And I will tell you, they don't always do a great job. They just don't. We're not perfect, and we need to be better in the law enforcement community. And then we need services from throughout the community to wrap around this student, this child, to help get them the help that they need, so this doesn't actually get to a point where it happens. And I can tell you, I've been in this situation. I have had 3 different investigations in my career that we would consider not situations where we needed help, but like if there had not been an intervention, a shooting would have occurred. The worst one I ever had was a middle school student was obsessed with carrying out a school shooting, documented over 100 drawings, poems, things about carrying out the school shooting. He had a full plan of what he wanted to carry out. All of that was developed. He knew how to use firearms. There were firearms in the home. There was ammunition in the home. When I talked to him, when I did my interview with him, he told me the only reason he hadn't done it yet was the guns were locked in a safe. And so he didn't know the code to the safe. So once he figured that out, that was kind of the thing that was preventing him. And when we went and did the home visit, when we opened up the closet where the safe was, none of the guns were in the safe. They were all just sitting out. They hadn't been put away, and all of the ammunition was out in the open as well. So realistically, if that student had gone and opened up that closet, they would have seen that these firearms were accessible, the ammunition was accessible, and things were locked up, and they could have potentially, I think we were very, very close to experiencing a tragedy like that. And it was only because it was reported by some students who saw the drawings, who then a teacher went and took the folder and looked at it and then reported it to us. And then we followed through with the investigation, that we were able to intervene. And great to say that this kiddo went on, he was able to get some treatment, get on the right path, and I believe graduated high school and went to college and is doing well. So that's a success, but also a super terrifying story. And it only comes through communication. So help us prevent these incidents by having the conversations with your kids. And these tragedies are absolutely awful, but you can at least say, hey, we're going to, pray for, have a moment of silence for these kids who lost their lives. And hey guys, I just want to remind you, if you ever see anything that's concerning, bring it to me, bring it to a responsible adult. Let us know so we can get people involved, because we never want to see this happen in our community. The last thing I want to say is I want to plead to our industry for more positivity and kindness. I think the answer to this is helping people feel loved and a part of a community and cared for. That is how we wrap our arms around each other, around the industry, around these athletes, and make people feel as if they belong. People who feel like they belong and are a part of a community and are loved, they're not the people who are carrying out these horrendous acts of violence. So please, as a community, we need to improve the positivity. We have to stop with the negativity on social media. And coaches and owners, we're a part of it too. We have our moments too. We're not perfect either. There are ways to be honest and give honest, critical feedback without taking things to negative, ad hominem style attacks, personal attacks. And we need to help promote that within our gym, represent what right looks like. All right, everyone, I know this was not a business episode. Ultimately, as you leave, what I would like you to do is make your plan, discuss your plan with your staff, discuss your plan with your parents and your athletes. Make sure people know that you are taking steps to keep their athletes safe in your gym, because as much as we want to win championships, athlete safety should always be the number one priority in what we do. Make a plan. If you need help, reach out to me. I know this was a heavy episode. I know it went for 30 minutes and I rambled a lot. I hope you got something out of it. And with that, we'll catch you on the next episode.